Well, good morning, and welcome to another week of Journey with Christ. I'm your host, Mark Mitchell, a preaching minister here at the Park Avenue Church of Christ. And I'm joined, as always, by Steve Fox, a minister for a long time. So,
it's nice to be here, and it's been nice to be here for a long time. I don't remember getting two snowstorms like that back to back, but that was kind of fun because that kind of closed down the city.
I know, I told somebody, I said, we're finally having a winter that I remember back in the 80s and 90s, it was winter. Of course, growing up, I remember when the creeks froze and they stayed froze.
Yeah.
So it has changed a lot, but we're getting a little bit of...
I grew up close to Cleveland, and
well,
my grandpa used to say we had two seasons, winter and July.
Yeah, that's a famous saying.
It could start snowing in April, and you wouldn't see the ground again for 3 or 4 months, maybe more than that.
Well, I actually kind of like the idea of the warmer winters we've been having. Though I know for some that speaks to a division in our world over climate change and global warming, but I kind of like some of the warmer temperatures. So hey, I know I don't want for us to destroy our planet, but at the same time, I don't think there's anything wrong with a few degrees warmer.
Well, I don't want to destroy our planet either. And when these guys say, well, in 100 years it's going to be 2 degrees warmer, I'm like, whoa!
Watch out!
That's going.
I think I can accommodate that.
I think I could do that.
Oh.
Well, what we're going to talk about this morning, if we ever get around to it, Mark and I always chase rabbits down another trail, but I'll start by giving you this illustration. And this man is deceased, and I know you're not supposed to talk about the dead, but he was
he can't hurt you now.
Friend of mine. He was a very good friend of mine. And I said in a meeting at the church where he was the minister, I said in the meeting that, I said in the sermon, that Bethlehem was 7 miles north of Jerusalem, and that in Jerusalem, on Calvary, is where Jesus offered his blood for the remission of the sins of the world. And those two things are both in the Bible. Those things are not of equal importance. One is obviously more important than the other one. Well, he came up to me after church and said, everything in the Bible that's true and everything is true is of equal importance. I said, you mean the two things I mentioned in the sermon are the same thing? He said, oh yeah, they're equally important. And I really tried to look at that. I tried to put myself in his shoes. I still haven't figured that out. I still haven't figured out how everything in the Bible, every verse in the Bible is of equal importance to others. So what Mark and I decided to study for the next few weeks, a couple weeks at least, is what does the Bible say is important to God? If God is shooting at a target and he's shooting at a bullseye, what's in the middle of that bullseye? What's important and what's... Now, I'm not saying that everything in the Bible is not true. I'm saying everything in the Bible is not of equal importance.
And I know that for a lot of people that idea is, it almost seems like heresy to make something more important than something else. But there are aspects of the New Testament. I mean, one of our favorites, 1 Corinthians 15. I mean, Paul just comes out and says, here's the first importance, which in their terminology would have been more like, here is the most important. Mm-hmm. Death, burial, and resurrection.
And we're going to get there in a minute.
But for some that would, it takes them out of their comfort zone. But you and I know, Steve, that we all invest ourselves in ideas, various concepts that we put our faith into, And because we put so much emphasis on that, and as a society we do that. I mean, like, ask someone today if what's more important, okay, we brought up a little bit about global warming. In some circles, global warming is more important than starving people. I would argue that, there are variations of more importance of anything. So it's just not like, Jesus at times proclaimed certain things, as better than other things.
Yes. And we do not study a book that says, this is equal to this, and this is equal to this, and this is equal to this, and you go through the entire Bible like that. The first passage we're going to look at, if you'd like to read it, is Ephesians 5, verses 1 and 2. And I would ask our audience to look in this passage as we're going to look at every passage on our list today. What does it say about who we're supposed to follow and how we're supposed to become like somebody?
Yes.
You want to read those two verses?
I can do that. Ephesians 5, 1 and 2. Follow God's example, therefore, as dearly loved children, and walk in the way of love, just as Christ loved us and gave himself for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God.
What's the first phrase say?
Follow God's example.
Be imitators of God. Now, you and I grew up having people who were mentors, teachers, parents, grandparents. We grew up listening to people who developed us and who turned us into what we are today. Well, we don't have to blame all of them for that.
No.
But, now, if I'm supposed to, one of the things that I always try to look at, especially when you're talking about elders in the church, if I see somebody and I in my heart say to my son, I want you to be like him, you're imitating that person. Now that doesn't mean you're going to be with them 24 hours a day, but there are certain characteristics that you're going to have that came about by you imitating that person. Well, in 5:1, Paul says, be imitators of God. I'm supposed to try to imitate God. How in the world do I do that? Well, we're going to take the next couple of weeks and look at some passages and say, this is how you imitate God. God is shooting at the target, and he's going to hit the bullseye every time. This is what God thinks is important, so therefore you ought to think it's important too.
But I'm going to give one little caveat here. He did give one example as who we're supposed to look at as the role model of what imitating God looks like. And that was Jesus. And the reason I bring that up is I know a lot of people who pretend like they're God. And they very well may take this verse and says, well, it said imitate God. Well, I'm being God. That's not what it means.
So you're not supposed to imitate me?
No. It's not even funny. In fact, let me get a little further away over that comment.
Lightning will hit.
Yeah, lightning or something else going to strike. No, Paul brings up walk in the way of love just as Christ did. Because Christ is our example. Paul, as I continue to remind us, Paul calls Jesus the exact imitation of God. And I say that is because the only way we know the character of God truthfully is by looking at Jesus. Because there was a lot of people got some things wrong about what God was like. And they got them wrong even in the Bible sometimes.
And that's a part of Old Testament history. Another thing that we'd like to bring up right now just for a minute or two. When you and I have looked at that list that we looked at for the past few weeks, we got interrupted there because of the weather, but when you and I have looked at that list, one of the things that it said was the Jews didn't understand what was important. They didn't understand They thought everything was of equal basis and that everything was equal to God, and therefore everything had the same similar consequences.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's not true in the Old Testament. The Jews, a lot of times, made very tiny, insignificant things important.
Mm-hmm.
And they worshiped those things sometimes even in a greater realm than the things that were supposed to be important to the Jews in the Old Testament. So how do we get that stuff out of the New Covenant? How do we figure out this is what God wants me to do? This is important. This is true,
Mm-hmm.
but it may have less significance than the other thing that you were looking at.
Absolutely.
Now you mentioned that one verse, so let's look at that verse in 1 Corinthians 15. I'll let you read again.
Okay.
If you got it.
I haven't. If you're already there, read it.
1 Corinthians 15, verses 1 through 3. I don't have it, so I'll give you time.
All right, I'm there. Okay, 1 Corinthians 15. Now, brothers and sisters, I want to remind you of the gospel I preached to you, which you received and on which you have taken your stand. By this gospel you are saved, if you hold firmly to the word I preached to you. Otherwise, you have believed in vain. For what I received I pass on to you as of first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures. You want me to finish all that little part?
Yeah.
That he was buried, that he was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Caiaphas and then to the 12.
The phrase we want to look at is the first part of verse 3. For I delivered to you, this is Paul writing to the Corinthian church, what I also received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures. I delivered to you as of first importance. Now, Paul had delivered a lot of things to the Corinthian church. All those things were significant. Only one of them was the most important.
It was at the top of the list.
It was at, matter of fact, in my what do you call that in the side of your, not my footnotes, in my margin, I have written down here in my handwriting, 15:3 is number one on the list, above all trivial matters. Now, trivial matters are true. Trivial matters
Yeah.
can have accuracy.
They can be just as honest and truthful as anything else. Here's something we can think about. It's Sunday morning. You should be at worship service. But let's say one of your neighbors is in serious trouble, whether it be health-wise, emotionally, or whatever. Now, do you love your neighbor, or do you come to the church building? Jesus put up there love your neighbors yourself as a pretty big deal. Excuse me. Now, I know it says love God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, but I think God recognizes what is most important in that moment, just like we should recognize what's most important in that moment. And we always let every moment, according to Paul, relate to that. Everything we do needs to relate to that.
Yeah.
It's the lens by which we see our entire world.
Now, you and I didn't talk about this before class, but this just fits perfectly what you just said. At Elkview, this is in the late 70s, when Susie and I lived at Elkview. I was preaching on a Sunday night at church, and the back door flew open, and a girl comes in and says, she yells at her father, who was there, obviously, in the assembly, says, "Dad, our garage is on fire." Well, every person in that church building, and on Sunday nights we didn't have very many, maybe 50 or 60, but every person in that church building had to decide something. Now, if I had just said, "Oh, wait a minute, I'm not done with my sermon yet. As soon as we get done with the sermon, we'll go take care of that house that's on fire."
And I'll bring the marshmallows.
Make s'mores. There was something that was
More important.
equally true, but that was more important. And so all the guys in the congregation jumped in their cars, and Russell's house was a mile away from the church building. The fire department was already there, and they were taking care of it. Well, somebody could have said, well, you're supposed to have an assembly. You're supposed to have church on Sunday night. Well, yeah, that's okay if you do that.
We had it near the place that was burning.
But that seems to me that was a little more important than what I was studying in Habakkuk or Jeremiah.
Well, imagine if you're in the emergency room and you're having a major coronary, and they wheel somebody in who has a broken arm, and you go, well, wait a second, I've got a major coronary. Yeah, but they were here first. We don't put importance on anybody else. It's first come, first served. That's the rule.
That's right.
Well, you would look at that place and go, my descendants have got a really good lawsuit.
Now, in that situation, both of those things are true. Somebody broke their finger, or somebody was having a heart attack. Both of those things are true. But one of them is certainly more significant than the other. That's what we're saying about the Bible. The Bible is exactly the same way. And when Paul says, this is what's of first importance, that means that there's other things lower on the list. It takes precedence. So there's some trivial matters that may be true, may be very valid, but you make sure that you get your list right. And Paul says here's number one on the list, the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus.
And there is, by no other way of saying it, it is absolutely foundational. And you could, I think, probably right behind it, according to the apostles later on, as they write their letters, which ended up being a huge debate among a lot of the churches, was Jesus truly God? Mm-hmm. Which we don't think anything of, but one of the reasons we have some of our traditions, and actually some of the things that is actually recorded, becomes extremely important. We know here in the Church of Christ, we say we believe Jesus is who?
God.
The Son of God.
John chapter 1, the
Yep.
Word. And
John was the last book written possibly in the Bible.
Yeah.
So maybe Revelations, but anyway, John was the last gospel written, and he was adamant about the fact that, hey, he was God. There are a lot of important things, but you're right, very first on top is the fact of what Jesus did.
That's number one on the list. And we need to put not only that verse, but that concept in our mind as we study the Bible. Because everything that's in the Bible is true. But certain things have priorities, and this is the first one. So if I say, here's something else that's of first importance,
Well,
then, and when somebody could say, and using this word, well, that's kind of presumptuous of Mark and Steve, because they're going to tell us what God thinks is important. We are, but we're not the authority.
no.
If you find verses that says, in God's mind, this is important, then you ought to put those in your mind too. But that doesn't mean that you have the authority to say, I can change whatever I want to, and I can put on the list whatever I want to. Paul says, when you look at the list, this is of first importance.
Well, it's like in the Old Testament, even they understood it, because they would make, through Proverbs and Psalms and a lot of the prophets, they would make lists of things that God hated, things that God didn't like, and this is what God loves, this is okay with God. I mean, even their presumption of what God wanted was, there are certain things that take precedence over other things. And everyone understands that. Because, I mean, you live your life that way.
You live your life that way. You treat your children that way. You teach your children that way. So
Yeah.
we ought to it should be no different than how God teaches us and how we look at the teachings of God that cooked us.
Well, even think about it like this. Your child, by law, unless you make arrangements otherwise, through circumstances, you're supposed to send your children to school. Well, your kid wakes up with 103 temperature one morning. Now, by law, you're supposed to send that kid to school. Are you going to?
No.
Why?
Well,
It's more important to leave them at home, let them get healthy.
yes, and it might make some other kids sick.
Might make some other
That's
kid.
what we're fighting about over schools right now with the masks.
But I'm talking about the reality we had before 2020.
Before that happened.
Yeah. We would have left our kids at home, and knowing that we would send them a letter as an excuse. This was behavior, that this was the reason they weren't there.
You put a guy in the back of an ambulance and you start driving towards the hospital, and you're driving 15 miles an hour, and the guy laying there who just had a heart attack said, well,
I guess I'm not important.
I must not be real. Well, the speed limit through here is 25, so
Yeah.
we just need to go to the speed limit. No, you get to the hospital as fast as you can get there because this guy's life is in your hands.
And you don't even have to drive an ambulance to do that, because I know every person who's ever driven based on an accident did not follow the speed limit. I don't care who you are. You drove faster than the speed limit allowed. Did you feel guilty about it?
Nah.
Nah.
Matter of fact, some people look for incidents like that where they can drive faster.
Yeah. Well, do you want me to read the next one?
Why don't you read the next one? We've looked at 1 Corinthians 15. This is of first importance. We're going to look at another one in John 13.
Okay, verse 35. I'm going to go ahead and read verse 34 too. A new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another.
Is that on God's target? Is that on God's bullseye? Is he shooting for that?
Well, according to Ephesians 5:1, yeah, to imitate God's love.
Imitate him.
And Jesus is just giving some clarifications. And in fact, he's saying to his disciples at this time, I'm your example in how you love. As I have loved you, you go and love others. And by that element, everyone will know. We always say everyone will know that you are my disciples, but there's a comma there and it shouldn't be there. Everyone will know if you love one another.
They'll figure that out.
Because in John 17, that's exactly what Jesus says. He says the only way that people can know that I am from the Father is if they follow my example by loving one another.
And that's number one on the list. And in the church, we have made so many things first on the list. If you have multiple communion cups, then people will know that you're following
You have a
God.
certain list.
Yeah. If you give money to orphans' homes, or don't give money to orphans' homes, or if you understand divorce and remarriage, or you don't understand, if you believe you can go to war or you shouldn't go to war, there's a whole list of things in the Bible that are significant. And here's one of them. Matter of fact, Jesus says, by this. So when he says by this, the lights ought to go on.
Yes.
There ought to be some fireworks.
It's a declarative
It's a
statement.
very declarative statement. By this shall all men know that you are my disciples, if you would. Now, there are all kinds of important things that you're supposed to do according to the New Testament. There's not one that's more important than this, to love each other. By this they shall know that you are my disciples.
And that I am who I say I am.
Now, we want to make sure that the right poster, right plaque is on the building. We want to make sure that what's written...
Whether you got a little C or a big C.
Yeah, that's right. That's how they'll know that you're Christian.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing, the variations. I mean, and I can remember, you don't see it quite as often, but 15 years ago, I mean, a lot of churches signified who they were by, King James Version only,
Yes. Or established in 33 AD.
Yeah.
That's an old congregation right there.
Yeah, yeah. We will attach importance to various things, and some will say, Steve, that well, there are certain things that are important, Mark, and we need to distinguish them, because otherwise somebody might say that you can do anything. Well, that is, please don't confuse, that's not what Steve and I are saying, but what we are saying, there are first importance things, and if what you're doing goes against those things, then you have a problem.
I've been fortunate enough in my life to see this activity at work among brethren, because I've been to a couple of debates that were pretty huge things in our brotherhood.
Mm-hmm.
And in those debates, you got people who, before they got there, they agree with this side, and maybe afterwards. Most of the time, that doesn't happen. If somebody's
They've made up their mind before they got
before they got there. So,
they just want to see the other guy get his block knocked off.
yeah, watch this, watch what we do to that guy. Well, it's possible that in those debates, in those major debates like that, you can be completely wrong about somebody or some doctrine and still love those people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I want them to do to me. If they disagree with me about something, I want them to still love me instead of... We go to war a lot with each other. We attack each other a lot. And Jesus said here, this is what I want you to look for. By this, the world will know that you are my disciples. That's at the top of the list.
And it is the only way you demonstrate or you imitate God.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus, throughout his ministry, dealt with people who probably weren't exactly what they ought to be. And let's just start with the 12. Matthew didn't come. He might have been born some serious lineage as a Levi, but then he went and sold his soul to the Romans and became a tax collector and alienated his entire group. You had a couple zealots on there, and what zealot meant was they actually carried weapons, and if you put Rome ahead of the Jew, they might pull them out and use them.
And that's where the habit of handshaking came into existence.
Mm-hmm.
I put my hand out, and you put your hand out to show each other that we don't have a weapon on us.
And we don't have a sword. Well, then you take in, and it's not like I'm forgetting the top guy. Does anybody think that Jesus didn't know what Judas was capable of? And yet, kept them, worked with them, loved them, demonstrated to them, and never belittled them in such a way to say that they were worthless in anything. And you and I know that loving one another is not the easiest thing in the world to do.
Oh my goodness.
I can't imagine how hard it is to love me. So
I can. I can imagine that. You're exactly right. When the conduct of people, the way they are, the way they live every day, the way they go after you or me or somebody else, that's going to be a part of life. But the part of life that really makes that tough is if somebody does something to me or says something to me that's really tragic, I'm not saying you can do this 100% of the time, but you work on it. You work on today loving that person and tomorrow loving that person and trying in some way to make it go in that direction instead of, well, I'm going to go get my rifle and I'll take care of this.
I don't.
In the world, there's so many people that have no concept of what love is. It's just me. I'm going to live for me. I don't care about the rights of other people. I don't care about the lives of other people.
Yeah. I just want to be right.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Paul says, and this is another one, we may, I haven't seen the list, so I don't know. Paul, and he says, as far as it's up to you, you know.
Yeah. Live at peace with all men.
Live at peace with all men.
Good luck on that one. Most of us can't do that in our own house.
Evidently, that's on one of those important lists.
Unless we have wonderful wives like Kelly and Susie.
Yeah.
Then it's a little bit easier.
Well, but you and I both know.
Did we record that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And they can do with it as they wish. But loving one another is such an all-encompassing behavior that in truth, as Jesus pointed out, love God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself pretty much sums up what we're supposed to do. Because if you do those two things, it pretty much takes care of everything. Now, does that mean there are people who love God that maybe don't see things the same way as I do? Absolutely. There are people who don't agree.
In your family.
Yeah, in my family. Shoot, it's like you said, I couldn't have fellowship with the guy I was 5, 10, 15 years ago.
No.
You know.
And you know, looking at these two things, when you put those two things together, of first importance is the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. And then Jesus says, by this love that you have for each other, all men will know that you are my disciples. It's interesting to me that in the book of Acts, there are 14 sermons. Some of them are very short, some of them are maybe a page long, but there are 14 sermons. And in every one of those sermons, the topic is the resurrection of Jesus. Every one of the 14. Now, that has something to do with how we look at the Bible, and that has something to do with how we look at love. In those 14 sermons, the early Christian world was learning by Hebrews and by Gentiles that the love of God was the greatest thing that was accomplished, and that this entire system that they've been following for all those years was going to be fulfilled because Jesus loved people who didn't love him. And Jesus allowed people to crucify him who didn't love him, and then would say, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they do. Most people would read that and say, that guy's out of his mind. Asking for forgiveness for the people who were killing him?
Yeah. Or just, he didn't ask, well, he asked God for forgiveness,
Yes.
but in and of itself, he forgave them too. Mm-hmm. And the resurrection, we think it's in the literal sense of Jesus Christ being raised. I think we sort of understand that, but in truth, I think I could argue that we don't, because we don't get the fact that the old life dies and the new life lives, and they are different. Mm-hmm. What's inside of me is going to transition, but it's going to transition based on the concept of the resurrected life, what it looks like. And the resurrected life looks like Jesus. Mm-hmm. Because that's why the resurrection is so important to us, is that he shows us what the resurrected life is. It's devotion. And you're going to suffer, you're going to deal with things, and you're going to have moments that you're going to just it's going to be hard to love God and love your neighbor.
There are several passages in the New Testament that say if you want to be like Christ, you have to adhere to the same kind of things that he did, and part of that is suffering. You want to participate or partake of the sufferings just like Jesus did. Well, nobody in their right mind gets up in the morning and says, boy, you know what I'd like to have today? I'd like to have somebody just beat me up about this faith thing that I have or this Christianity thing I have. But it's going to be there. And it might be, kid carries his Bible to school and people make fun of him. Well, okay, that you could call that suffering. But in Africa, where they're burning down church buildings and killing kids, I think that was my watch.
Okay.
That was on my watch.
Okay.
Yes, it was. Do you want to say anything else about by this shall all men know that you are my disciples?
No. And we're at the end of our...
That's a good place to end.
It's a good place to end because these first 3 verses are, if you wanted to pick 3 verses that lay out the foundation for a lot of things that will come along, but everything's in context of some certain things.
And since we looked at these 2 passages in this list, I'd like to challenge our listening audience to do this, if you can, this week. And I'm going to try to do it too. You don't have to go out and look for these people. They will be around you, whether you like it or not. But find somebody that you don't like very well and say, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take a little piece of my heart, more than what I've had before for this person, and actually try to like that person a little more than I did last week or the week before.
And I'll do the same for you.
Yeah. Well, let me give you my list.
No, I mean...
I told you what my grandpa said one time. He said, I don't hate anybody, but if I ever start, I got the guy all picked out.
Yeah, I got the list already made.
I've got a list like that too.
Yeah.
But you're exactly right when you said this is hard to do. It's just so much against our nature. Because when somebody goes after me, my nature says, well, go after him and do something worse to him than he did to you.
Eye for eye, baby.
Man, it's and
tit for tat.
There's a great sense of freedom when you can discipline yourself through the mercy of God and through the grace of God. There's such a freedom that when you can do that, other people don't understand that freedom. They think the best thing to do is revenge. Go after that guy. Go after that woman. You know what she said about me? Well, I'm going to say something about her.
Well, imagine you and I, when we were kids playing sports, and let's say we were playing basketball on the court. What if you didn't keep score? How much fun would it be?
Yep.
I mean, who cares?
Yep.
You don't keep score, but we can't help ourselves. I know in T-ball leagues that they don't keep score, but I can guarantee you 3/4 of those parents, they know whether their team won or lost.
Those parents are keeping score.
They're keeping score.
Yeah.
We can't help ourselves, so we have to learn to help ourselves.
I have figured out how and this is a good place to end, I have figured out a way to solve that problem. You put all the kids on the field, and then you put all the parents in the gymnasium next to the field, and you give each parent a joystick, and he can move his kid around wherever he wants to move it. And then that way, nobody will be arguing about, well, the umpire was wrong about this, and he was wrong about this, and the coach made this stupid move. The parents are in control. Well, they think they're in control of it anyway, so you might as well give them something.
I gave my $100 to the league, so yeah.
Well, that had nothing to do with biblical suggestions.
No, but it speaks to the human condition.
Yes.
So, well, Steve, I guess we'll end there, and this coming week next week, we will take up from there and move on.
Look for somebody that you can love a little bit more.
Look for somebody you can love just a little bit more. Well, on behalf of Steve and I would like to let you know just how much we appreciated you joining us this week. I do apologize for not having the third camera this week. I inadvertently left something at home, so hey, just pretend like it's the beginning of 2020 when it was just using 2 cameras with Steve and I. Well, on behalf of Steve and I, God bless, and See you next week.
I don't know where to wave now.
Wave right here.
Wave up there?
Yeah.
Okay. What if I want to wave over here? Would you still love me?